Hi again. We've reached chapter 10, the last chapter of Dwight Wilson's 1977 book, Armageddon Now. And this chapter is Jerusalem, What Now? It's followed by a short epilogue. And so it's good for us to meditate on just what has changed and what's remained the same in those, nearly two generations, going back to shortly after the emergence of Lindsey's book, The Late Great Planet Earth, and the SixDay War, and the subsequent war in 1973. All of these things are what excites Wilson to want to write this book. So he starts off Jerusalem What Now with a quote from a famous evangelist and Bible teacher of the last generation, Martin R. DeHaan, in The King's Business, 1961. DeHaan says, "This then, said Ezekiel 2,500 years ago, would comprise the great northern confederation of Gog and Magog, and we are today living in the very day of the fulfillment of these prophecies." Nelson Bell, in Christianity Today, 1967, said that for the first time in more than 2,000 years, Jerusalem is now completely in the hands of the Jews, gives a student of the Bible a thrill and a renewed faith in the accuracy and validity of the Bible. He's talking here of the events of 1967 Six-Day War. And Lindsey, in The Late Great Planet Earth in 1970, the current buildup of Russian ships in the Mediterranean serves as another significant sign of the possible nearness of Armageddon. To which Wilson comments, since the 1950s, the most significant event for the Premillenarian was Israel's conquest of Jerusalem in the Six-Day War of June 1967. John F. Walvoord, the president of Dallas Theological Seminary, called it, quote, one of the most remarkable fulfillments of biblical prophecy since the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. This event ranks second only to the 1948 establishment of the State of Israel in the premillenarian dramatic drive toward Armageddon. The last sentence was Wilson's comment on Walvoord in 1967. After the Israeli conquest, Wilson goes on, the Israeli conquest of the Sinai Peninsula in the 1956 Suez Crisis, Israel had been induced to withdraw in exchange for a guarantee by the United States and other nations of the right of free passage through the Straits of Tiran to the Israeli port of Eilat on the Gulf of Aqaba. For a few years after the crisis, the conflict was relatively quiet, even though a treaty was never established, the Arabs still refusing even to recognize the existence of Israel as a state. By 1967, the Arabs' confidence had grown because of the addition of Soviet arms and the self-deception of their own propaganda. When rumors developed of a retaliatory strike by Israel against Syria, the Arab nations massed their troops on Israel's borders, and Egypt's president, Gamal Abdel Nasser, declared a blockade of the Tiran Straits. Israelis considered this an act of war. There had also been threats to annihilate their state. On June 5, 1967, the Israelis suddenly attacked and within 2 hours had destroyed most of Egypt's air force, and within 6 days had captured 80% of Egypt's armored equipment and had defeated the entire Arab coalition. The conquered territory included the whole Sinai Peninsula, the West Bank of the Jordan, the Gaza Strip, the Golan Heights, and most significant of all, Jerusalem. Jews had not even been allowed to visit the city since the 1948 war, and the victory brought not only a euphoria, but a rebirth of the Jewish spirit, particularly for those who had grown to adulthood since the War of Independence. The renewed hostilities were a surprise to no one, as the heightened tension of ever more frequent incidents had anticipated the ultimate explosion. While some may have trembled with fear at the prospect that the coming war might escalate into an atomic confrontation between East and West, premillenarians trembled with anticipation at the promise of exciting new developments in the Holy Land. As early as October 1963, an article in Moody Monthly quoted the Intelligence Digest to the effect that the Arab nations had decided to invade Israel and that Russia was committed to supply arms. We are going to see an invasion of Israel, and we shall see great pressure upon America, Britain, and France to intervene. The author, Moody's Vice President S. Maxwell Coder, cited with approval President John F. Kennedy's affirmation of support for Israel's security. The premillenarian response to actual hostilities was given public expression only 4 days after the war began. Moody Bible Institute's radio station WMBI presented a 2-hour broadcast in which faculty member Alan Johnson said, quote, "To me, these events confirm the literal interpretation of Old Testament and New Testament prophecies. The entire city of Jerusalem, for instance, has now come under at least temporary control by Israeli forces." End of Johnson's quote. He reminded listeners of Jesus' prophecy in Luke 21:24. Jerusalem would be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles were fulfilled. Johnson could not be sure that these events were a direct fulfillment, but interpreted them as indications of the possibility that the return of Christ would come soon. It was the story of David and Goliath all over again, was the analysis of the Evangel magazine editorial that headlined The Miracle of Israel. But certainly it was not an immoral miracle. The war was depicted as a reminder of the indestructibility of Israel. These are quotes from the edit. These phrases, immoral, miracle, and indestructibility of Israel, are phrases from the article in Evangel. L. Nelson Bell editorialized in Christianity Today under the caption, "Unfolding Destiny," that for the first time in more than 2,000 years, Jerusalem is now completely in the hands of the Jews, gives a student of the Bible a thrill and a renewed faith in the accuracy and validity of the Bible. Bell believed that the overwhelming victory did not just happen, but that God was working out his own purposes far above and beyond the capabilities of men and nations. That's a direct quote. As he concluded his remarks, he again spoke of the thrill of seeing prophecy fulfilled. This twin sense of destiny and thrill was truly the epitome of the general premillenarian feeling associated with the Israeli victory in the Six-Day War. More about this question of the Gentile times and what marks their expiry in the next few pages of Wilson's analysis. I'll put in a link right now to David Barron, who was a Jewish Christian of the latter part of the Victorian era into the 1920s, and he'd written a book on Zechariah, a wonderful prophetic interpretation of that book, and one of the best ever on Zechariah. I think you can get it on PDF now, but I had read it even as a Jehovah's Witness, and I was amazed at Barron's command of the subject. So we did a video on this some years ago, and I asked the question in the video, who has history vindicated? Whom has history vindicated? David Barron, who wrote his book on Zechariah during the First World War, or J.F. Rutherford, who had different set of expectations, some of which were parallel to the premillenarian view of the restoration of Israel. But of course Rutherford abandoned that view in the early 1930s. Barron did not. He anticipated trouble. So look at his analysis of what would happen when Israel was restored. Barron turns out to be something of a prophet. Why? Because he's listening to the text of the prophets, not working from his own imagination, as many others, including Rutherford, habitually do. So I'll put that David Barron versus J.F. Rutherford video on your screen, and we'll return to the Gentile Times 1967 question next time. See you soon.